Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
So, is Sweden a socialist utopia, or is it actually a hyper-capitalist, free-market success story? Honestly, it's a question that completely divides people. Some folks hold it up as the ultimate proof that heavy government intervention works, while others point to its massive global corporations as proof that free markets absolutely reign supreme. Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to look right past the political slogans and reveal the real, deeply pragmatic, and frankly fascinating story of the Swedish economy.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. First, the Great Swedish Paradox. Then, we'll break down the capitalist export engine. And third, solve the mystery of who pays for welfare. After that, we'll look at cracks in the model. And finally, future tests and trade-offs.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Great Swedish Paradox. Because, let's be honest, there is a massive cognitive dissonance when it comes to how people view this country. On one hand, you have the famous welfare state, right? Free healthcare, free university, incredibly generous parental leave, and really strong labor unions. But then, you look at the capitalist side, and it's mind-bending. Sweden has no inheritance tax. It has zero wealth tax. It literally has a lower corporate tax rate than the United States, and it boasts more billionaires per capita than America. So we need to completely toss out this political myth that Sweden is either purely socialist or purely capitalist. It's really neither.
It all boils down to something called the Swedish deal. And it's not about the government owning all the companies and controlling the property. Far from it. Markets are open, and free trade is absolutely central. It is, at its core, a highly pragmatic societal contract. Think of it like this. Hyper-competitive capitalism pays the bills, and a generous welfare state steps in to reduce the risks of everyday life for its citizens. It's this incredibly carefully balanced ecosystem of social trust and highly open markets.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, the capitalist export engine.
Now that we get the philosophy, we have to ask, what on earth generates enough money to fund all this generosity? Take a quick look around your life right now. You're probably listening to music on Spotify. Maybe you've got an IKEA bookshelf in the corner, or you drive a Volvo. Sweden only has about 10.7 million people. Its domestic market is tiny. So to survive, it was historically forced to build this massive, kind of hidden engine of global exports. Swedish engineering, tech, and retail firms literally had to go global from day one.
So, let's walk through the exact logic flow of how this well-oiled machine actually works. First, you absolutely must export globally to bring money into the country. Then, those successful companies generate wages for their workers and profits for their shareholders. Next, the state collects broad tax revenue from those wages and from everyday consumption. And finally, that revenue is what funds the universal welfare. You see, the welfare system isn't funded by good intentions. It relies 100% on the brutal competitive success of those global companies. If that export machine ever stops, the welfare state goes broke.
But hey, they didn't just figure this out overnight. Sweden's current financial discipline was actually born from a massive trauma. Back in the early 1990s, Sweden suffered a devastating banking crash. Property prices tanked, unemployment just skyrocketed. The state had to step in, but they forced the banks to be totally transparent about their losses. And out of that economic punch to the gut, Sweden learned a really hard lesson. They set up an independent central bank and put strict fiscal rules in place. They realized you can only have a generous welfare state if you have intense public restraint and low public debt.
Okay, let's move into Section 3, who pays for welfare?
Because we really need to tackle the single biggest misconception about the Swedish system. Get ready, because this is the ultimate reality check. People just assume you pay for universal healthcare and free college by taxing the billionaires, right? That is entirely false. The ultra-rich do not fund the welfare state. The broad middle class pays for it. High earners can face income taxes well over 50%. And the standard VAT, that's the tax on the stuff you buy every single day, is a whopping 25%. The middle class pays these huge rates, but they kind of view it as a social insurance premium. Basically, you pay a lot up front, but you know for sure you won't go bankrupt if you get sick or have a kid.
Now, contrast those massive taxes on everyday workers with Sweden's incredibly quiet, stealthy billionaire class. Take the famous Wallenberg family, who control vast amounts of Swedish industry. Their literal family motto is, to be, not to be seen. Because Sweden actually removed its inheritance and wealth taxes to keep money from fleeing the country, capital here is treated very delicately. Inherited money is allowed to just quietly compound across generations, building these massive family-controlled investment empires.
So if we take a step back and summarize this grand bargain, it looks like this. Capital gets exactly what it needs to compete globally: low corporate taxes and highly open markets. Workers get a safety net that is the absolute envy of the world: healthcare, free university, subsidized childcare. And the state gets the broad, high taxes from the general population to keep the whole thing running. Concentrated private wealth and highly egalitarian public services basically just learn to live side by side.
All right, time for Section 4, cracks in the model. It sounds like an elegant solution on paper, right? But while this model is fascinating, it is absolutely not a utopia. Let's look at the cracks in the foundation, starting with the massive housing problem. In cities like Stockholm, strict rent control policies keep prices artificially low, which essentially fractures the market. You get these insiders who hold on to cheap, regulated apartments for decades. Then you have the outsiders, usually young folks and immigrants, stuck in rental queues that can literally last for years. And because renting is nearly impossible, you get a third group, highly indebted buyers who had to take out massive mortgages just to have a place to live, making them incredibly vulnerable whenever interest rates spike.
And then there's this really fascinating vulnerability. I want to pose this question directly to you. What actually happens during an outage in a totally cashless society? You see, Sweden is a uniquely high-trust, tech-friendly place, so they raced into a digital economy. Millions of people use an instant payment app called Swish for literally everything, from buying a coffee to paying bus fare. Physical cash has practically vanished. But moving that fast creates some serious risks. Efficiency is great, but what if the power goes out? What if there's a major cyber attack? What about the elderly or the unbanked who still rely on physical money? A lack of emergency resilience is genuinely dangerous. And these exact vulnerabilities are currently forcing the Swedish central bank to rethink their whole system. They're even exploring an e-krona, a digital central bank currency, just to make sure public money stays relevant and resilient in a crisis.
Okay, last stop. Section 5, future tests and trade-offs.
Because the world around Sweden is changing really fast, and those modern pressures are seriously testing the economy. Take 2024, for example. The security situation in Europe fundamentally altered centuries of Swedish neutrality. Joining NATO was a massive, historic shift. Suddenly, national defense isn't just some political talking point, it's an immediate, heavy economic reality. Defense spending is shooting up, which sure is creating a huge boom for domestic military tech companies like Saab, but it also adds major new permanent costs to the national budget that they somehow have to account for.
But at the exact same time, there is this thrilling, massive economic pivot happening right now up in northern Sweden. They're making a historic push into green industry. We're talking heavy investments in green steel, hydrogen power, advanced mining tech, and entire battery supply chains. But to actually pull this off, it requires astronomical investments, thousands and thousands of skilled workers, and a serious reevaluation of their energy grid. Actually, it's bringing the conversation about expanding nuclear power right back to the forefront.
When you put all these pressures together, the difficult math ahead becomes pretty obvious. The state is going to have to constantly tweak the incentives of their grand bargain just to survive. You've got an aging population clashing with the rising costs of elder care. You've got a weakening currency, the krona, making imports way more expensive for everyday consumers. And you've got the very real challenge of integrating immigrants into the labor force to keep long-term growth alive. The math is just relentless. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. Sweden isn't just some simple internet meme about socialism or capitalism. It is a complex, real-world study in confronting hard economic choices head-on. There is no free welfare state, and there is no risk-free capitalism. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on today. If there are no perfect systems in the world, only choices, what trade-offs are you willing to make in your own society? Thanks for exploring this with us today. Keep asking those hard questions.